Hello, Data Leaders. This is Les Miller on the Data Leaders podcast. And today on the show, I have Anand Singh. Anand is the Director of Business Intelligence at Philip Morris International, and he will be speaking at our Data Leaders Transformation Roundtable in Zurich in March 2018. Anand, welcome on the show.
Thanks, Les.
It's great to have you. And can you just tell us a little bit about your background and your journey of becoming the Director of BI over at Philip Morris?
Mm-hmm. See, it's a long career. Most of my career has been spent in market research, and the career spans both market research agencies like Nielsen, Innovate, etc., as well as client organizations like Reckitt Benckiser, Coca-Cola, and of course, Philip Morris, where I work currently. My career was punctuated by stints in strategic planning, as well as a couple of brand stints where I handled brands like Marlboro, Coca-Cola, and all. And through this, the in and out of market research, as well as spending the time that I did in market research, I realized that I have a certain level of comfort with data. And what I really like is the ability to visualize the data. So to reduce a lot of data into a simple story and tell it in a very simple and powerful way, which usually is what we tend to call insights. And this role sort of was a natural fit because that's what this role entails. I mean, we essentially look after all the data, mostly in sales and marketing, but even beyond that. And our job is to reduce it to what we call business intelligence and insights. So that's how I ended up being in this role.
Fantastic. And originally, what really compelled you, to step on that path? So if you think about maybe your academic background or your personal areas of passion, what really, made you gravitate towards data?
It was actually my effort to correct a mistake, and I'll try to explain that. So if you'd asked me when I was a kid, I always wanted to become an engineer, and I did that. So I graduated in electrical engineering. And then usually what happens is, between career choices, I worked as an engineer for a while and then gravitated towards MBA and finally ended up with an MBA in marketing. So this was sort of moving into insights, and data analytics was my effort to balance my engineering inner self with my marketing training. So I feel that this sort of combines both of them, and that's why I ended up in this field finally.
Makes perfect sense. And you will be speaking at our Zurich Roundtable next year on a very interesting topic. Your topic will be combining different data sources to do predictive modeling. Now, I know that in FMCGs, and you have a very strong background in FMCG data, you guys deal with a lot of data from a lot of different sources. I mean, why did you choose this particular topic from all the available options?
So see, as I mentioned, I have been in the market research and insights field for over 2 decades. Big data is a sort of fairly used, abused term in terms of lots of people talk about big data without really knowing exactly what it is. But if I can use that term, I had my first brush with big data about 10 years back when I used to work for Coca-Cola. And we were trying to do a market mix modeling, which is essentially trying to take all external and internal variables and trying to forecast what is the impact on shares and volumes and how we could control that better in terms of our marketing efforts to promote brand Coke and the entire portfolio of Coca-Cola. So the couple of learnings that we took out of that, we had a lot of data, and that those learnings are true even today. So we had a lot of data, but in most organizations, data is built to answer a specific business question. When you try to use the same data for modeling, you start realizing that there are lots of gaps in data that is useful for business decisions in terms of answering a simple question on sales or volumes or something, versus data which is really suitable for modeling, which is combining different data sources to arrive at a solution to a problem that you are trying to. So for example, in this case, it took us one full-time employee working for more than 6 months just to get the data in place to do the modeling. So while we were all so excited about doing this market mix modeling, it took us 6 months before we had any reasonable data to start that modeling. And so that was learning number one, that the kind of data you have and how you sort of manage the data is more important than doing the modeling. The second was, there was a lot of variable which usually don't qualify as data. So when we think of data, we think of sales data, financial data, but there are a lot of other things which are, so to say, soft data, which we figured out in this case were equally important. So just to give you an example, One of the big factors driving sales in case of my previous organization, Coca-Cola, was the number of holidays in a month. Okay, now this is not something which qualifies as data, so to say. And it was just by chance that we ended up including this as one of the modeling variables, that it explained a lot of variation in sales. So essentially, yeah, that we should not discount any variables, and data is not what we always think of as data, but any information can be data. It's just a question of how do we treat it. So that was the second. And the last and the most important was that models are just a means to an end. So while again, models are very sexy to work with, we all get sort of, really excited about new and better and faster models. But finally, if it does not make sense, it does not make sense. And again, going back to the Coke example, we did this whole market mix modeling, but what happens, because any such model tries to explain sales as a function of all the input variables you give, it ends up only explaining the short-term sales. So in this case, for example, while all the model outputs made sense, what the model came back to us saying is that advertising does not have any impact on the brand sales. Now, if you'd just taken the model at, say, face value, then we would have said at Coke that, okay, let's cut advertising, which is the largest sort of spends that Coke does as a marketing organization, and we'll be fine. But business-wise, it doesn't make sense, because you know that advertising today does not necessarily push sales tomorrow, but it helps build the equity of the brand long-term. So then those are business calls that you take that go beyond any modeling or any data or something. So I would say these are the three key learnings. And of course, we worked on other models and all, but going back a decade, I thought that, at that point in time, if I had known all this before doing it, I would have ended up doing a much better exercise in terms of that market mix modeling. And I thought it's something that we should share with others, especially based on the other learnings that we have developed.
Wonderful, wonderful. And obviously, you have a very strong background. And earlier, you told me that you were part of quite a few interesting projects. I mean, are there any particular projects or successes around which you build the content of the session?
Yeah, for this session, what I wanted to talk about, again, building on what I just talked about in terms of market mix modeling, we just finished a project at PMI where we are trying to build a forecasting model to predict the success of new products before they're launched in the market. So essentially what we did is we took the global database that we have of all the products for Philip Morris and competitors in terms of what was launched, all the characteristics of the launch, all the external variables like market in which it was launched, the price at which it was launched, and so on and so forth. And trying to do that, we have built up an analytics model which combines all these sources so that when you sort of feed in the model, say that you're launching brand X at price Y in market Z, it sort of tells you what the chances of success or failure of that product. And that has really been used very, very, very widely in our organization for the last 1 year. And the reason I wanted to highlight this is because on one hand, it sort of helps us highlight how different data sources can be combined to build up one model. On the other hand, it tells you the power of predictive modeling, how we can use modeling to help business avoid a lot of costly mistakes, because every NPL that you potentially launch, which is likely to be a failure as per this model, helps you save millions of dollars in terms of marketing spends, not to talk about the manpower commitment and the sort of morale, the way the morale goes down in an organization when something fails. So it helps you avoid all those mistakes. So that's why I wanted to talk about that, because it's a good way to showcase a success and at the same time also talk about the structure that went behind it to build that model and combining different data sources.
Mm-hmm. And what were your main challenges? Because many organizations that we work with, quite a few of them are big FMCG companies. So everyone is looking for a similar solution, but there are quite a few common obstacles that people usually encounter. I mean, what were your main challenges while you were trying to build that system?
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll talk about both the challenges as well as what helped us. So we were lucky, I think, not by design, but just by chance. So what happened when we started working on this model about a year and a half back, we worked with an external agency. To be fair, the external agency did a very good job and they came back with a model, which was their model. Now, what happens in these kind of things, especially when you're trying to do data modeling and all, there's no one solution and there's never a right solution. You can always keep on refining it because these are all sort of calibration based model, which are sort of almost self-learning. So the more you work on it, the better the model becomes. But when you work with the external agency, you give them a mandate and they have to come back with a solution, because obviously there's a time cost involved and they have to move on to other projects. So we got back a model which we were quite happy with. So all credit to that agency. But we always had this nagging thought that something about the model doesn't seem right. So sometimes we would get forecasts which would make sense to us in terms of our understanding of the business. Sometimes it did not. Then I mentioned that we were lucky because at Philip Morris we established an internal team of data scientists. And they were looking for some projects to train these data scientists on the business, because these were all people who were recruited from outside and they had a very good data understanding, but not a good business understanding of our category. So we gave this model back to them as a challenge and said, let's work on this and improve it. And we worked with them for almost 6 months to rebuild this model. So we sort of stripped the model back to what it was and then tried to look at each aspect and rebuild it. And in that, we discovered that there were so many things in the model that we could refine, that we could further improve, which sort of helped the data scientists understand our business better and which helped us understand, for example, a very basic thing, like what's the difference between R and Python and when do you use one and when do you use the other. So what we found through this journey over 6 months is that we ended up learning a lot about data science and models, and the data scientist team ended up learning a lot about our business. So that was like sort of both a challenge as well as learning for us.
Yes, and talking about the learning, so what would you, if you had to start all over again, even though it's been evidently a success, to even, to further accelerate that process and to even further improve on the results that you got, what would you do differently? Is there anything that you would prioritize, or is there anything that you would do less of, just to give the audience a little bit of insight about the takeaways and the learnings that you gained?
I don't think in terms of prioritizing we would do anything differently, but yeah, what we would definitely do is see, what I mentioned earlier, it's important to factor in business understanding, but sometimes we factor in too much business understanding and make certain assumptions that you end up sort of after 6 months realizing we're wrong. So I would just sort of let the machine do its job in the first case, because that's what machine learning is really about, and then start to layer in business understanding. When you start with a certain context and a business understanding, you tend to discount certain factors or over amplify certain factors. And that ends up giving you a model that is distorted. So I would say that try to get all the data, put it all in a dump. You have excellent machine learning models these days that can do most of the job better than human beings for you. And once you've got an output, start analyzing that output and trying to see what worked and what did not work. Don't start with certain assumptions, because then you'll end up excluding variables like what I talked about, holidays in Coca-Cola, or certain variables here, which in hindsight look obvious, but when we started the project were not that obvious. So those kind of things. So yeah, so start with the model and then factor in the business understanding. Don't start with the business understanding, because then you are not giving the data scientists a fair chance to do their job well.
Very good, very interesting. And your session itself, so it will be a roundtable for 30 senior professionals working in data-related functions. So people working in business intelligence, analytics, data science, insights. And it will be a very interactive session. So first you will give a presentation, and then the audience will have the opportunity to ask you specific questions. And then there will be a group discussion, which you can facilitate. Can you just tell us a little bit more about the session itself? I mean, what will it cover exactly?
So we'll talk about this model. So that would be the starting point. So we'll talk about how this whole predictive modeling thing was built. But I'll also talk about the challenges in terms of what are the kind of data sources we used, what were the problems with the data, because quite often what happens, you have a lot of missing data. So how do you treat that missing data? How do you treat data that is not discrete? And, because you don't always have data, which is, as I said earlier, data. Sometimes you have data, which is just information. So how do you convert that information to data? And how do you sort of get the data analytics team and the business team on the same platform? Because to give you a very simple example, we had this very interesting conversation when we gave the consumer awareness data to our data scientist team. And they asked us a very simple question is, what is a question? And we said, yeah, it's obvious. What is a question? Said, no, because we have certain questions where you have more than one answer. We said, yeah, of course we have more than one answer, because when I asked you which are the brands you are aware of, then you can get 5 answers to that, because people are aware of more than one brand. So the data scientist came back and said that, no, for us, that's not one question. Then those are 5 questions. Should I treat that as one question or 5 questions? Now, there's a very simple thing, but it's just that what I earlier said, that data that is good for business versus data that is good for modeling is not always the same. So what is good for one might not be good for another. So the challenge is that how do you sort of, so I'll talk a bit about that. And yeah, about our whole journey of how we went through it. As I mentioned to you earlier, I'm planning to get for the session one of our data scientists, so one of the team leads who helped us build on this. So together, I think we should be able to cover both the data side and the business side on how we went along the whole journey.
Great, and I think I think it's a great idea, because it can help, because you will have that higher level of view, but your data scientist, will have that more hands-on perspective. And how do you think that the audience members will be able to put the session's insights into practice? We always want to make sure that what they leave with, it's more than just interesting ideas, but there are also takeaways that they can use right after they get back to the business. What do you think that the most practical takeaways will be?
I think a couple of things. So one is that, of course, we learn from each other. So not through only the topics that I'm talking about, but the discussion that we'll have, I think it will help bring all of us on a common ground on what are the common challenges and how do different people deal with it. So I think that would be one key learning for all of us, including me. And the other would be that in marketing, we are quite used to very complicated models, which always factor in a lot of known variables. Okay. And through this model, what we wanted to demonstrate is something like a new product launch. If you take this specific example, it almost sounds unintuitive to say that you can predict the success or a failure of a new product launch without knowing anything about when the product is going to be launched, what is the kind of marketing support you will give, what is the kind of distribution or the internal sales support you will give. And still we are able to forecast the likely success or failure with more than 80% accuracy. So through that, what I wanted to tell people is that, it's time for us to shed our old marketing, inhibitions and sort of, mindsets that we have, and start trusting data more, because a lot of data which we as human beings cannot process simultaneously, machines can, and we can actually leverage that by adding our business understanding to that machine processing and coming up with insights which are much more powerful.
Fantastic. And Anand, I'm very much looking forward to that session. I know that it's a very hot topic in the data leaders community, and it sounds like you have a really good structure in place for that as well. And we already touched on quite a few different topics. I mean, if you had to capture only one idea from the session, what would that be?
I think it would be all about artificial intelligence and machine learning and the reason I want to highlight that is because I feel this is one technology that is developing faster than what any one of us imagine. So the way I see it, in less than a decade, we don't need data scientists even for that matter. So, just like today we work with, say, Microsoft Windows without realizing what's happening in the background versus, say, 20 years back when you actually need to know programming to work with computers. Soon this will be become very democratic. So in terms of machine learning software and all, it will be very democratic. Everyone will have access to that. So that advantage will be gone. Today, if one data scientist is better than the other, that's a huge advantage. So all that will matter is your business understanding and how you're able to use these models to sort of build upon your business understanding. So my take would be we should focus on that, not get too obsessed with I don't know this programming language versus that programming language. Focus on understanding the business and the rest will follow, because the rest anyway will be done by machines. So we need to do what we are good at as human beings, which is, get insights and understanding.
So that's a very good point, because this is something that the machines will never be able to do, right? And this actually raises an interesting point, because on the roundtable, because it will be very small, very interactive, it will be a very select audience as well. As you pointed out earlier, the value will come from the speakers, but also from the conversations that will naturally emerge. And a lot of the times attendees talk about future technologies as well that they are excited about. AI and machine learning is something that we usually cover. Is that the one technology that you are most excited about today, AI and machine learning?
Yeah, I think the automation of that, because today you still need to learn a bit to do that. I think it will become, as I said, like PowerPoint or something which you can do intuitively. So it's
Mhm.
not about knowing how to type on a slide. It's about how do you create the design better than the other guy.
And do you have any particular plans about, to put machine learning and really leverage that in the future? Anything exciting that you would like to share?
I just told you that, we should not focus on the software and focus more on business understanding. But after attending a couple of conferences and all, I'm myself planning to, learn at least one of the programming languages just to understand it better. So yes, I mean, I want to do that, but at the same time, yeah, as I said, it's not important. It's just so that I understand better what my colleagues, data scientists are doing. But
Fantastic. Fantastic. And Anand, again, we are very much looking forward to your session, and I'm sure that the audience members will gain a lot of value, both from your presentation and your experiences and insights from PMI. And I think there will be a lot of value in the conversations as well in the room. And we reached a point in the interview where I'd like to ask you a couple short questions that will be less about, your session and data, but they are more general. We usually do this with every guest. It's called the quick fire round. So basically, you will have around 30 seconds after each question to give me a very impressive answer. So I hope you're ready.
yeah,
Wonderful. So I will ask the first question, and then we can just continue. So the first question is, what is the biggest mistake that you almost made?
see, I told you earlier that I trained as an engineer. So I think the biggest mistake I did was deciding to do an MBA, because I think deep down inside, I'm still an engineer. And I would have been a better engineer perhaps than what I am today as a marketing professional. I did manage to correct it to a large extent by moving to analytics, which sort of combines the best of both. But yeah, so I still think that was a mistake. I would have been a better engineer in hindsight, but it's easy to say that after 20 years. At that point, it was not so clear for us.
Thankfully, it all turned out well.
Yeah, it did. But
Yes, and next question is, what is the best piece of advice that you've ever received?
in one of my previous jobs, my boss, who was the managing director of that affiliate, always told me, he always used to say that humanize a problem. If you try to get into a problem too much without thinking of the human insights besides the problem, you'll never be able to solve it. So I think human motivations are much more complex than what we can ever, I mean, all of us understand it, but to try to put it down as, a series of steps and all is always an issue. So yeah, the best advice I got was to always think of the human being behind a problem, and you'll always be able to solve it. If you get too bogged down with data and with other things, then you always lose sight of what the problem actually was.
That is very good advice and also very relevant from a data perspective. And next question is, what is your most influential book and why?
See, there are many, but overall, I like books which sort of tell a story in an interesting way. So, one example I remember is Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, where the author Robert Pirsig. So, through a motorcycle journey, he talks about a lot of things, including quality. And there's one quote there which I remember. So, we have artists with no scientific knowledge, and scientists with no artistic knowledge, and both with no spiritual sense of gravity at all, and the result is not just bad, it's ghastly. So I mean, this he tells in the context of quality, but generally, I mean, sort of but yeah, I like such books like Freakonomics and all, which sort of connect a lot of dots and tell you a simple, compelling story about how these dots connected together.
Yeah, I think Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. It's been a while since I read it. I think I was like 16 or something. I think I couldn't really appreciate it in its entirety. And I just recently read a very interesting article, which is kind of a follow-up on that book. So thanks for the recommendation. I think I will definitely revisit it. And we will also leave the book in the show notes, so the audience members will can check it out after. And the next question is, who is your most inspirational public figure and why?
Honestly, none. And I'm saying this because it's not that I don't like people, but I think that we should not idolize people. We should idolize qualities in people, because when you idolize people, you end up creating cults, which is always ends up badly. So I think we should focus more on the qualities than people themselves.
This is a very interesting answer. And let me ask you a bonus question, kind of following up on that, if you don't mind. And which are those qualities then you think that should be, really put forward in terms of what we should appreciate and respect in individuals?
I like people who manage to have humility despite knowing a lot more than others, because then they remain approachable and you can learn a lot from them.
Humility. Wonderful. And next question is, even though you don't have a main public figure, but what is your favorite quote, and how do you put it into practice?
Actually, honestly, I can't say it's a favorite quote, but I was just discussing with a colleague this morning, and she mentioned something that she has picked up from a workshop recently. And that was, don't connect your data, connect to your people. And I think it's really powerful, especially in the context of the session that we are talking about.
Yeah, and then this is actually a great line to share on Twitter as well. So very Twitterable too.
Yeah.
Yes, and the final question is that what advice would you give to new and inspiring data leaders?
See, as I told you, we have worked recently with a lot of data leaders, and I find all of them are very good in terms of understanding models and data and maths and everything else. So my advice to them would be, don't focus on the data and the models, you know, all of it. Focus on business understanding and you'll end up being a great data leader and a great business leader.
Fantastic advice, and I'm sure that the audience members, I mean, at least those who are, just at the beginning of their journeys, and probably people who are a bit further down the line as well, will take this to heart, and I'm sure that it will result in a lot of success. And Anand, it was great speaking to you. Thank you for sharing a bit more about your upcoming session. And again, we are very much looking forward to having you at the roundtable. Do you have anything else that you would like to add, or would you save the rest for March?
No, I'm quite looking forward to March. So yeah, and quite looking forward to meeting everyone, who's planning to join the roundtable. So yeah, look forward to meeting everyone there.
Fantastic. Anand, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show. And then I guess I'll see you in March.
Yeah, see you and thank you.